So hi, my name is Lupien, and this is Interplay. This is a project that's about the direction of urban transformation in suburban Paris and how it's possible to use emotions, more specifically the atmosphere of love, as a compass. And the place I'm bringing you today is called Les Agnettes in northwest of Paris. It's a place that's right now in the middle of major transformations brought about by the arrival of a new train station on its western corner. Like dozens of other developments similar around Paris, will now be interconnected by the Grand Paris Express. The area is now facing densification pressures. Les Agnettes and the Dream of the 50s are now asking, currently dominated by long and monofunctional housing blocks, surrounded by oceans of parking. Les Agnettes is a classic example of what Colin Rowe was calling the architecture of good intentions. We all know too well how the future that was projected in the 60s did not materialize exactly as expected. However, we're left now with generous spaces, solid mainframes, structures that can be brought to a state of completeness that may have never existed. In the face of the quasi-unanimous frustration of the inhabitants, vis-à-vis the impersonal, the generic, and the antisocial spaces proposed for the area that are but a repetition of history, we're asking, how should the story of Les Agnettes be completed and not repeated? The thesis that was behind this project was exploring how our emotional spectrum can be used to chart possible spatial futures, how the spatial dimension of emotions can be used to complete spatial stories. And now I would like you to do a little exercise. The same interviewed for this project. I'd like you to visualize a street that appears to you, and only you, as a place where you could imagine yourself falling in love. What you've just generated is what cultural geographers call atmospheres. They are quasi-objective phenomena that exist between space and emotions, a spatial quality that carries the direction of the emotion it is associated to. So even if love relationships are all over the emotional spectrum, and even if you can technically imagine yourself falling in love anywhere, not any place comes to mind when you imagine somewhere where you can fall in love. There's a specific imagery influenced by a mix of personal experiences and cultural exposure as generating the image that prompts in your individual mind when imagining a space of love. And like designers considering an architectural typology, it's in the overlaps of multiple and diverse projections that we can start the encompassing nature of the atmosphere of love and begin to recognize it as a valid cultural tool. And the point behind this whole project is that in that image that you've just generated, there's a whole story that unfolds. A story about possibility, difference, and delight. A story that could help us make better streets. What we do when we project an emotion into space is that we make visible a specific future for that place, a direction. It's our way to adapt our experience of reality in order to reframe the way we engage with it. It reveals a world that shares the same intentions than the emotion it is associated to. And since love is a very complex emotion, defined subjectively at every moment, changing from individual to individual and from culture to culture, and since it can be directed at such a wide range of objects, from gods to animals to landscape and romantic partners, it's only by trying to understand the ground of love, what understanding of the story that its spatiality is telling us. There's two recurring themes that stand out in descriptions of the nature of love. Two concepts that I think are the driving forces that construct the urban atmosphere. On one side, love as the glimpse at promise of home, and on the other, love as the fundamental experience of difference, a world of possibility and difference that materializes itself in delight. In order to broaden and diversify my own perspective on how the atmosphere looks like in space, I conducted dozens of interviews with people from the area and sketched their vision. I tried to get a sample of participants that would be as rich as possible by learning from people of a diversity of cultural backgrounds, sexual and gender identities, and socioeconomic situation. And also by looking at many case study streets in and around Paris, I've arrived at a set of 11 motifs that kept coming back over and over. And they are right now a best guess at trying to understand some of the spatial dynamics that are contained in the atmosphere of love. And the driving direction behind it. These concepts not only arose through conversations, and research, but they are the spatial dynamics that we can observe in an uncountable amount of cultural depictions that make use of the atmosphere to tell of their stories. When we start to translate these into space, we start to feel the type of architecture it creates. Not only do we start to see how it will look like, we also start to understand the type of changes that would need to occur for that story to unfold in a place like Les Agnettes. We see that these changes would need to happen step by step, over time. We see that it would need to involve the people of the area, and that the role of the architect within the city would need to be rethought, so that the alterations to the land, the facade, and the roofs could happen like a steered buildup of intentions. By taking a small section of the area as a synecdoche, we can start to understand the way these changes would come. The Rue Jean Prouvost in the Place des Agnettes is the only section still untouched in the master plan and development. The only meeting points are entrance lobbies and staircases. The blocks themselves are typical of the area, with precast concrete panels, a diversity of double aspect flat layouts, the strength of the concrete frame, the absence of supporting walls, and the facade being free from structural function and unitarily built, all lending itself gracefully for customization. Aside from the housing blocks and the parking spaces, the Place des Agnettes is the only place in the whole development with a café, and I've seen last year the arrival of a temporary communal garden by Atelier d'Architecture Autogéré, where I spent most of my time last summer. By accepting what is there and imagining the place differently, with a specific emotional lens, we start to see the kind of alterations which would be necessary for that place to head towards this. Alterations to the land, to the facade, and to the roofs. The roof of Les Agnettes could become the expression of local intentions. When new streets in the sky, new skylines would be active rooftops. Residents who wish to could apply for an extension to their existing dwelling, or to move into a newly designed flat on the roof of their building. Once installed, the individually designed and built CLT shells would enable the future residents to adapt, or not, their space. By extending the structural grid of the existing frame, the new forms will be completing the strong and flexible foundation offered by the existing building. The newly created streets would bring to life dormant rooftops of Les Agnettes and give a chance to the buildings to reach a state of completeness that may have never existed. The space between the buildings could also be completed, creating new moments for the people of Les Agnettes, where small cooperatives of 3 to 7 units would be created by local inhabitants. The buildings would be individually designed vertically in conversation with architects, but also horizontally between units to solve the clashes. The units could host single or multiple occupants and be of mixed or single use. This would be put in place, where future residents become slowly owners of their units by paying never more than 30% of their salary. A set of guidelines would be operating to increase the manifestation of the motifs. Restrictions on widths, heights, but also on massing and design. A set of principles that would exist to steer the projects in the direction of the motifs, like the requirement to have one inhabitable exterior element per street-facing facade, to contribute at augmenting the sense of gradients of the streets, or the demand to have vegetation support at every opening on every facade to foster the sense of weaved nature, or the mandatory 1 meter of set from the neighborhood unit that would contribute at augmenting the tectonic character of the street. These would result in a plurality of proposals that would create a tapestry representative of the residents of Les Agnettes. Les Agnettes could become a place where the facade of its buildings are an expression of the personality and desires of the people that live there. Could be taking full advantage of the modular curtain walls of its modernist heritage and add layers to the existing, new connection points, new moments. Alterations that could be conducted with cranes and lifts to minimize disturbances. With opened and closed recesses or projections, the facade would start to become more gradient, more connected, and full of little narratives, where unused rooms could be changed into recessed balconies or projections, could make an additional eating, living, or working space. Structures that would either slot themselves into the existing frame or hang themselves to it. And at the ground level, an oversized lobby could become, for example, a small residence that a resident always wanted to open. All these changes to the facade would inevitably be affecting the interior spaces, series of events that would be progressively depolarizing the intimacy and add layers to what's there. Like coming out of nothing, but would rather be coming out of what's already there, what's dormant. The story less about what has been, what happened, or what it could be or become, but more about what's there, happening in between.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Louis. I think if you stop your film from showing, then hopefully the judges will emerge and can ask you some questions. There we go. John's got a hand up.
Yeah.
Kick us off.
Thank you, Louis, for the presentation. As you were presenting, I was thinking about how this would be implemented, and indeed you touched upon that with the cooperatives, and very much seeing this, if I've interpreted it correctly, as the locals building and establishing this. Do you really think that is practical in reality, and do you think that could actually occur, and what do you think some of the challenges to it would be?
Yeah, like I think that's definitely possible to be happening. I think it would definitely have to happen step by step, like I've been doing it. The good thing, I've been spending a lot of time last year on site with the people who are kind of trying to build like alternative futures for this area. And kind of the interest that they built onto my project has kind of triggered a lot of reactions and possibilities about how this could be implemented into the current master plan, especially in that kind of little area where it could be tested. So I think in practicality, it would probably start with a couple of prototypes, start with cooperatives, see how it would evolve, having donated these into community land trust, and possibly just build up a couple of these. There's many precedents that I'm not mentioning here, but are integrated in that. People have been doing it. I'm thinking of like Lupien or Lacaton Vassal, who's kind of adapted some of those structures, and who also kind of thought about infill, like I'm doing that. Like a lot of these developments right now are being onto big pressures, and there's a lot of precedents of people who've adapted these structures in and around Paris, but also in England as well, and pretty much everywhere. I'm from Canada myself, but I think these structures are Europe has a very interesting situation right now, considering the lots of densification going on everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, you've got more confidence than I would as to how we would get together, having dealt with, say, things like airspace development, and even dealing with my own neighbours on very, very simple issues. But I certainly like your concept, but I think there's a reason sometimes there are lead developers, and I would question personally how it would come to fruition under the cooperative, but at least you had an opinion, which is good. Thank you.
Esther now for a question.
Great project and presentation. My question is, do you see the role of the LPA or architects changing with your scheme?
Totally. Oh, sorry, were you done? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I'm just touching on this again on the presentation, but yeah, definitely. I'm imagining architects to play a total different role in the kind of longer version of the presentation. I'm talking how in a kind of multiple phased situation where the architects are kind of developing the projects with these are kind of then presented to the mayor's office, where the architects are occupying a central role at kind of judging which projects go on, and then afterwards developing the projects kind of concretely with the cooperatives, and then constructing them also. So architects basically present at every stage of development, and also way more integrated into the community, which fits quite into the politics of the area. It's quite a kind of communist, a bit very left-oriented type of mayor who is not right now present in that commune, in that little area. So he has been quite receptive and interested into into that type of approach, way more kind of bottom up, and having architects present in the conversation at all levels. So yeah.
Great. Chris, you've got your hand for a question. Thank you, Esther.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I mean, to at this stage to sort of embed yourself into the community and start kind of questioning some of these sort of potentials and features and the way in which they're delivered, I think is really great. And I'm pretty fascinated by the concept of structuring sort of regeneration around emotion, which is a pretty unusual kind of stance to take. But I think, you know, it's a really interesting one. And I was just wondering, you know, your time on the site, you mentioned about the community garden, you know, so there's obviously a bit of activity happening in terms of the regeneration at a community level, and whether within that you see, I suppose on the one hand, did that inspire your work, or did you see some of your own thoughts and theories reflected in the outcomes of what that has offered back to the community?
More of the latter, I would say. The seeing those initiatives already in place, a lot of emphasis put on kind of greenery and rewilding of the areas was already present on the site. So I kind of like always love meeting my own sorts of interest and kind of what I was defining as kind of emotional and love kind of dimension of the area. But yeah, I think through those conversations with the local of the area, what was really great to see through that all kind of emotional lens is to see the bypass, like, because in participatory design, there's generally, I've experienced this in practical work, you know, facing a wall, generally faced with practicalities and like kind of very needing and personal needs. You have from people, when you start taking an emotional angle, you have that bypass that happen, and people are starting to really generate those spaces that are full of potential, full of ideas, like really respectful of others. And it's been like a well of possibility, and so refreshing for the also people, the local authorities who are right now in there, but also for the residents who are kind of, it's literally opening this world by their thoughts and ideas. It's literally a breath of fresh air coming into these this development. So it's been refreshing to see these reflected over there.
Great.
Go to one final last question from Charlie, because we've had 5 minutes, and then Tia's who's very patiently been waiting, will be our last presenter. So go for Charlie.
Thanks, Cecilia. Thanks. It was a great movie. I very much enjoyed it. I did like the retrofit energy in there. My question is, if the setting were not a rather plain modernist housing estate, but instead were a set-piece classical composition like Bath or Edinburgh New Town or some of the older parts of Paris, perhaps, which is still all residential and very uniform, but classical and older, would you advocate a similar approach to retrofit?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. Would you mind repeating that last part?
If your setting were not a modernist estate, but something older, but equally uniform and collectivized, like a classical terrace, would you use the same approach to retrofit?
Yeah, totally. I think this is a process that emotions, and not only love. I'm talking about love, but like just the use of emotions in general, I think can be applied to pretty much anything. One precedent that I think is quite probably interesting, if I just share extremely quickly my screen. In 1902, Louis Bonnier was projecting a different future for the streets of Haussmann, and was literally just imagining how they could be different. And this triggered all the kind of afterwards, obviously the Art Nouveau and the bâtiment from Louis Bonnier. Obviously, at that time was not necessarily using emotions or anything, but that kind of redefinition of straight edges, Haussmannian streets, which we consider maybe one of those kind of more classical approach, which I think you're referencing at, kind of that plurality that we gained through what came after 1902, kind of led to that. And I think this could be applied possibly to Bath and like in any places. I come from suburban Canada where you have those detached houses, and I've been trying to like also imagine, and this is something I'm literally considering to apply, try to imagine other type of spaces, other type of typologies, other types of situations, what it would look like. Literally the people and our imaginary and collective imaginary can create it somehow.